Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. This is the Inept General bringing you a unit stat comparison for the new units we're going to be getting in the upcoming The Shadow and the Blade DLC for Total War Warhammer 2. Now, in The Shadow and the Blade, we are going to be getting Death Master Snitch going up against the demon-possessed Malice Darkblade. Now guys, quick note, in this video we're not going to be covering too much lore about these new units. If you'd like that, do check the top right hand corner now, or you'll find links to individual army videos where we go through all that stuff down in the description below. So let's kick things off by having a look at the stats of Malice Darkblade himself. When comparing him on foot, I thought we may as well compare him to the Filthy Azure, the High Elves. So we're going to start off by comparing him to Tyrion. So, Tyrion and Malice, as we can see, on foot, they both have very similar amounts of health, well, exactly the same, in fact, 4,288 for both of them there. Tyrion with the higher armor, the armor of Narion, doing him some favors, at 128 compared to Malice's 90. Leadership, both of them sit at 85. Speed, both of them are both, fit, strong elves, 36 on foot. Melee attack 60 for Malice. Tyrion beats him out at 75. Melee defense 60 for both of them. Tyrion with the higher weapon strength at 470 with armor piercing. Malice himself only at 400 of armor piercing. And they both have the same charge bonus on foot. The aspect here is that on paper, in his natural state, Malice looks to be a little bit worse than Tyrion. And that kind of plays out in their costing as well, with Malice on foot being 1995 in terms of his cost on custom battles with his gear and everything, and Tyrion is around 2,242 with all his gear as well on foot. So they kind of play out as far as the cost balancing goes there. Both of these heroes also, of course, have a mount option, with Malice Darkblade having Spite, and with Tyrion having his trusty horse, Melhandia. So let's have a look at how those stats rack up, with Malice on Spite and Tyrion on his trusty horse. When they're on their horses, Malice actually gets a bit of a health bump over Tyrion at 4,980. His armor is around 110, so that goes up a little bit. Tyrion stays at 125. Leadership, both again still matching. Tyrion, however, is much faster on his horse, hitting a speed of 95 against Malice's 68. That's to be expected with an elven horse going up against a Cold One dinosaur. Melee attack, those stay the same with Tyrion on 75, Malice on 60. Their melee defense matching at 60. But on Spite, the weapon strength goes up to 450 armor piercing, getting a little bit closer to Tyrion's 470 armor piercing. Tyrion's charge bonus goes up a bit to 90, and so does Malice's, but not quite as high on 65. Now, in terms of their costing here, there's a bit of give and take here with the slower Malice, a little bit more health. He's much closer to Tyrion in terms of some of the stats he was behind on, but a little bit slower as well. In terms of how they cost up when they are both mounted, Darkblade is on 2,345 with his gear, and Tyrion is on 2542. As with all things with these stats, with their individual abilities, the fire that Tyrion can spew out, the fact that Malice has the ability to transform into a demon, giving him a second life bar, which depletes over time and gives him different abilities and different bonuses, really does make it kind of unknowable who's the better of the two in terms of cost. But it gives you an idea. I think you could easily say, with those abilities taken into account, he kind of stands on par with Tyrion in a fight, and with the transformation ability, might even be able to take him one-on-one. So you get an idea of where he stands, at least as far as Elven Lords go, very much in that mounted warrior niche there. Let's take a look at the new general for the Dark Elves, and that is the High Beastmaster. Now, the Beastmasters were a missing general type from the game so far. Great to see them making an appearance. The idea was that these guys would operate mainly out of Karond Kar, if I remember correctly, kind of where Felhart likes to hang around and call his hometown, and just taming these huge monstrous sea dragons and Charybdises and hydras, and just sort of going along with them. And in some of the tabletop, had a few Beastmasters going around behind some of these creatures to keep a better control of them. But it's good to see the High Beastmasters making an appearance, armed quite strangely with a spear and a whip. They do have some good anti-large abilities there, and they're good charge defense as well. Now, it's actually kind of tricky to put these up against anyone. I couldn't find a perfect fit in terms of who or what other generals to compare the High Beastmasters to. So I just figured, let's pick a guy who also likes a good whip, and that is Kazarak the One-Eye, and their costings aren't too dissimilar either. So let's have a look at how they rack up in terms of their statistics. Now, the High Beastmaster has a lot less health. That's maybe to be expected with Kazarak being a legendary lord, but he's sitting at 3,928. Kazarak is sitting at 4,972, so almost 1,000 more there, so quite significant. The armor for the Beastmasters at 50, not the most armored generals you're going to find, and Kazarak sitting at 100. Leadership is at 80. Kazarak has a lot less leadership at 75. They're a bit quicker than a Beastman at 46 with those fleet elven feet, with Kazarak coming in at 42. Melee attack, they are matched on. Melee defense, Kazarak takes it with 52 over 45, but not too far away there. In terms of their weapon strength as well, the anti-large coming in at 440 weapon strength for the High Beastmaster, and the Beastman coming in at 490, no anti-large for him there. Charge bonus, much higher for Kazarak. He does have those horns on his head. In terms of their costings as well, they're not actually too far away from each other, with on foot Kazarak costing 1261, and as we can see, the High Beastmaster costing 1132 here. So not too far off, and for that money, you'd think Kazarak is the better option on their head-to-head, but the anti-large and the utility of the Beastmaster can't be ignored. So that's kind of how they compare on foot, and one of the reasons I chose Kazarak is because he also likes to ride around in a chariot, and the High Beastmaster goes around on a Scourge Runner chariot. So let's take a look at some of the stats for them on the Scourge Runner chariot. Now, the Scourge Runner chariot is much faster than Kazarak's chariot, and he also is obviously a missile-focused chariot as well. So you have that, and these guys can really go fast compared to even some cavalry units. So let's have a look. The armor stat goes up on the chariot for the High Beastmaster to 80, getting a bit closer to One-Eye's armor stats. The leadership to 80 again stays where it was. 92 on speed over Kazarak's 70. That's just the different types of chariot they have. That's to be expected. Melee attack 36, higher than Kazarak on his chariot. Melee defense 25, one worse than the One-Eye. And weapon strength 340 compared to Kazarak's 400. But then he gets anti-infantry and armor piercing, and the High Beastmaster just gets anti-infantry. Charge bonus 105 for the One-Eye, and charge bonus is 70 for the Scourge Runner chariot. Now, obviously, there's ammunition and range and sort of missile damage that we can't compare to Kazarak, but that's still pretty good as far as the chariot goes. So the High Beastmaster also gets the option of a Manticore, but for lore purposes, I like the High Beastmaster on one of his chariots. So we're not going to necessarily have a look at how he looks on the Manticore. I think you get a good idea. And the mount really changing up how you might play the Beastmaster as well. Maybe early on he's on foot, he's hunting some monsters or some larger units, some trolls or what have you. And then you move on to making him a bit of a missile ability, coming in, doing damage where he can from time to time, but also maybe taking away that anti-large ability he has with his spear when on foot. After the High Beastmaster, we have a new hero for the Dark Elves, and that is the Master. Now, the Masters are basically the nobility of, or the lesser nobility of Dark Elf society, not quite up there to be able to lead armies, but still able to afford good armor and respected amongst most of High Elf society when they're not murdering each other. So these guys are melee specialists, not dissimilar to the Elven Noble. So let's compare their stats to that of the Elven Noble. Armored and shielded, they have a shield which is significantly different from the Noble, which does not. But they're both armored, armor piercing, anti-large, and they both have charge defense against large foes. Now, in terms of their health, the Master takes it a little bit with 3,700 compared to the Noble's 3,688, but that's negligible, really. That's about one decent hit from most things. Armor, 90 with shield, so much better against missiles, whereas the Noble is only 80 armor. Leadership, the same. Speed, the same on foot. And melee attack at 42 for the Noble, a little bit higher than the Master's 36. Melee defense, 50 for the Master and 48 for the Noble. Weapon strength, 360 for the Master and 340 for the Noble. Charge bonus, 20, a little bit higher for the Noble. So you get the idea that maybe the Noble's a bit better at attacking, the Master will last longer, and when he does hit, he hits a little bit harder. And as you can see, the Master is a little bit more expensive at 1,084 versus the Noble's 934. So that's how he stands against the High Elf Noble on foot. Both of these guys have flying mounts with Eagles versus Pegasus, but then you're really just looking at the difference between the creatures then, rather than their fighting stats. So I think this just gives you a good idea, with them both on foot, how they stack up against one another. After the Master, we have our first actual unit, and we're going to start with the Bloodrack Shrine. Fantastic piece of equipment here with the Medusa on top. Now, these guys are missile units and melee-focused units with anti-infantry, causing terror. And I thought, because they're such a weird kind, they're listed as a magical chariot, but there's nothing really to compare them to except for the Death Hag's chariot as well, or her wagon. And so they're kind of the exact same bit of gear. So I thought we'd just stack the two up and see how they compare directly against one another here. As you can see, the Bloodrack Medusa is a little bit more expensive than a Death Hag on the same bit of gear. And the Death Hag is obviously a hero unit as well. So let's see how they stack up against one another. In terms of health, the Bloodrack Shrine takes it with 7,116. The Death Hag at 5,732 on her chariot mount. Leadership, 80 for the Bloodrack Shrine, 75 for the Death Hag, so a little bit worse. Speed, 50, they're on the same bit of machinery. Melee attack, 22 for the Bloodrack Shrine, a bit better for the Death Hag. Melee defense, 26, a bit better for the Bloodrack Shrine than the Death Hag. So again, we're seeing this kind of similar thing with the Master and the Noble, where the Bloodrack Shrine might last a bit longer, but the Death Hag is a bit more aggressive, particularly with that poison ability there as well. Weapon strength, 200 for the Bloodrack Shrine, anti-infantry, and for the Death Hag, we're looking at 260, so a bit harder hitting there. Charge bonus, about the same. That should really be about the same number as well, but, you know, let that slide. And then you have the magical ammunition, because the Bloodrack Shrine is also obviously a missile unit with some not bad range, kind of maybe similar, a bit better than the Stalkers for the Tomb Kings, let's say. And missile damage, quite hard hitting there where it does hit, at 375. Now, the thing about the Bloodrack Shrine is it also has two auras about it. This is really where it's kind of coming into its own and doing most of its work, probably. And that is a Hex, where it offers -4 leadership and -7 melee defense, called the Aura of Agony. And the Aura of Ardor, which is +7 melee attack for your guys and +4 leadership. So really can, if you get it into a big melee, make the difference between any kind of combat situation there. So an interesting unit, great to have it. It was a significant hole in the Dark Elf army, along with the Medusas, who we will move on to next. The Medusa is a strange creature in Total War Warhammer 2, a single monster unit, hybrid, missile, melee specialist. It's a bit of a strange one, and when we're looking at how to compare the Medusa to anything, if it was a unit of, say, 6 of them, you'd maybe look against the Stalkers of the Tomb Kings, something along those lines. But as it's a single monster, the only thing that really jumped to mind was to maybe compare it against, not any of the big dinos of the Lizard Men, but maybe the Bone Giant of the Tomb Kings, which is also kind of big monster that can do quite well in hand-to-hand, but also shoots missiles as well. So maybe a bit of an unusual matchup, you might be thinking down there in the comments, but you know, it's just what I thought we should have a look at, just to see where it stands, what kind of damage it can do. So when we are looking at the Medusa against the Bone Giant, we can see that they are not too dissimilar in terms of cost. The Medusa costing around 1400 and the Bone Giant costing around 1600. Both of them have armor-piercing missiles, both of them cause terror, but the Medusa has anti-infantry as well as being a decent melee combatant. So let's take a look. The Bone Giant has almost twice as much health as the Medusa at 12,620 compared to the Medusa's 6,420. In terms of armor, the Medusa is a living thing, whereas the Bone Giant is a big bloody statue, or a lot of ruined bones of a giant, depending on which lore you're paying attention to, and so it has a lot more armor than the Medusa. The leadership at 65 is higher for the Medusa than the Bone Giant. Speed, 58, not bad, a good bit of pace there from the Medusa. The Bone Giant just sitting at 32. Melee attack, both of them matching up at 30. Melee defense, a little bit higher for the Medusa at 34. Weapon strength, not too dissimilar for both of them actually, at 390 for the Medusa and 400 for the Bone Giant, both with armor piercing. Charge bonus, much higher for the Medusa at 52 to the Bone Giant's 20. Both of them do magical missile damage. Similar ammunition ranges there from 18 to 20. Range, much lower on the Medusa, of course, sitting at 110 compared to the Bone Giant's 350. But the Bone Giant's more sort of artillery range than the Medusa, which is a bit more close quarters. Maybe I think that's about the range, if memory serves me correctly, around the Beastman archers, maybe a little bit less than that. I can't remember off the top of my head if that's right, but I think it's sitting about that range. The missile damage is 375 armor piercing for the Medusa and 625 for the Bone Giant. So the Bone Giant able to do a lot more damage there. But the Medusa, good for getting into combat. Maybe not as hardy as the Bone Giant with all that health and all that armor. But it does have the anti-infantry. Although that isn't showing up in the stats menu below, you assume there is an anti-infantry bonus in there as well. Another unit I thought we might be able to compare the Medusa to, maybe sort of a hybrid specialist, is actually a hero, because the Medusa is a single entity unit. And so I thought we'd take a look at the handmaidens of the Ever Queen as well. Now, when we look at the Handmaiden of the Ever Queen, looking at a cost around 908, significantly cheaper than a Medusa, at least on custom battles and multiplayer battles, but a hybrid unit as well with sort of a decent melee fighting ability. They have anti-large and bows, and so the range is a bit more significant, but we get a bit closer with armor and leadership and stuff like that. So on foot, the Handmaiden is looking at around armor of 40 compared to the 30 of the Bloodrack Medusa. The 65 leadership comparable to the 75 of the Handmaiden. Speed, the Medusa's got it with the Handmaiden on foot. Melee attack, the Handmaiden has it with 40 against the Medusa's 30. Melee defense, 34 versus the Handmaiden's 52. Weapon strength, 360, anti-large, a little bit lower than the Medusa's. Charge bonus, lower than the Medusa's as well. The ammunition, of course, of the Handmaidens, flammable, magic, a lot more ammunition. 80, so 70 more range than the Medusa, and less hit missile damage when it does hit, but with armor piercing as well. So these two do compare, both can fight. I'd say the Handmaiden is a better fighter than the Medusa, but the Medusa does have that mass behind her. She can throw around some units as well, in my experience with the DLC so far. Just a few interesting comparisons there. A bit of a hard one to sum up, really, the Medusa, but I hope you guys get an idea of where she stands there. Try and get those missile damage off where you can against high value targets. It's what you're probably going to be aiming for. And then when you've used up all the ammunition you can without affording to get her in the fight, throw her in there and she will do pretty well for you as well. So that is the Bloodrack Medusa. Moving on from her, we have the Scourge Runner Chariots. Now, for my buck, these are the most interesting addition to the Dark Elf army in this new DLC. They are pretty pacey and they can get about. So when we're going to compare the Scourge Runner Chariot, we really should take the Missile Chariot of the High Elves. the Tyrannok Chariot and see how they stack up against each other. Now, the Scourge Runner Chariot is a little bit more expensive at 950 compared to the 900 of the Tyrannok Chariot, but both of them do some very interesting things. The Tyrannok Chariot being anti-infantry, the Scourge Runner Chariot being anti-large, armor piercing from the Scourge Runner, which is not a fact with the Tyrannok Chariot. In terms of their health, 6,208 from the Scourge Runner Chariots to only 4,888 from the Tyrannok Chariot. Armor about the same, leadership slightly less on the Scourge Runner Chariot at 65 compared to the Tyrannok Chariot 70. Speed exactly the same, both of them very rapid chariot units getting around, which really some of only the fastest cavalry are likely to catch up with. Melee attack 24, comparable to the Tyrannok Chariot. Melee defense 23, again 1 and 2 off there for those two, comparing these two units. Weapon strength, both of them 40 with anti-infantry. Charge bonus 50 for the Scourge Runner, a little bit higher charge bonus for the Tyrannok Chariot. Ammunition 48, comparable. The Tyrannok Chariot does have magical ammunition though, and the range 150, a little bit less range than the Tyrannok Chariot at 165. Missile damage 97, anti-large, armor piercing compared to the 124 missile damage from the Tyrannok Chariot. Now, that really means that you're really going to be aiming for some of the big boys with the Scourge Runner Chariot, maybe even some cavalry, which they can outrun. Just try and keep ahead, doing some real damage to those heavily armored units, those large units, compared to the Tyrannok Chariot, probably. And so, yeah, they make a very interesting unit. You probably want 1 or 2 of these in most of your Dark Elf armies just to harangue and harass, maybe chase off some cavalry, keep them distracted while they chase around these chariots across the battlefield. That's the last unit, actually, for the Dark Elves. So, without further ado, let's move on to some of the new Skaven units, starting with their legendary lord, Deathmaster Snitch. And so, Deathmaster Snitch. When looking at who to compare the Deathmaster to, I wanted to take other kind of dual-wielding lords who share kind of similar frenzy-ish characteristics to the Deathmaster himself. And so the first one we are going to compare the Deathmaster against is Lockyer Fellheart. Now, Lockyer comes around at a similar cost to the Deathmaster, fully kitted out as they are standing. Lockyer doesn't have his dragon in this comparison, of course, but without the dragon and with the other bits and bobs on Fellheart, he's looking at around the cost of 1601, if I believe, and the Deathmaster is around 1745, so they're not too far off in terms of cost in custom battles and multiplayer. Now, in terms of their life, it looks like the Deathmaster is losing out to Fellheart a little bit at 3,900 compared to the 4,200 of Lockyer Fellheart. And Lockyer, of course, has the much higher armor value compared to the Deathmaster, who only has 30 armor. You know, understandable for he's only wearing kind of a cloak made of human hair and spider silk. In terms of leadership, the Dark Elf takes it again at 80 compared to the Skaven 70, but the Deathmaster is a lot faster at 54 compared to the 40 of Lockyer on foot. Now, in terms of melee attack, the Deathmaster takes it, understandably so, in my opinion. 70 compared to 65. Melee defense, a little bit lower. They just sort of traded for melee defense in attack in that area. The weapon strength's comparable at 450 for Fellheart and 460 for the Deathmaster. But the Deathmaster has armor piercing and Fellheart has anti-infantry. And the charge bonus goes to the Skaven. Now, there are some abilities here, and it's always hard to compare the individual abilities of each one of them when you're not looking at the stat line, but things like the whipping blade attack and things like that kind of bring up the Deathmaster, I think, in terms of his overall cost, and why he's a bit more expensive than Fellheart, although their stats are pretty comparable, and that armor and higher life means Lockyer is potentially kicking around a lot longer. Now, the next lord I wanted to compare the Deathmaster to was Crone Helbron, just in terms of the lack of armor, and they are both dual-wielding, if I remember correctly, as well. So, we have Helbron here at 4,288. She has around the same health that Lockyer Fellheart did, and we see that the armor-wise, these two are very comparable as well, in that 15 armor for Helbron, which is even less than the Deathmaster himself has. Leadership, Helbron wins out. Hers is the same as Lockyer Fellheart at 80 and Deathmaster at 70. Speed, still slower than the Deathmaster. Weapons attack is the same. Melee defense, the Deathmaster beats her by 2. Her weapon strength is a bit higher, and she has armor piercing and anti-infantry, and her charge bonus is around the same. Now, the thing to bear in mind with current Helbron is she's actually a bit more expensive than the Deathmaster, with her cost fully kitted out on foot at around 2,152. So, in the stats, she looks like she might be a bit better. Their armor's comparable when it's that low, but Deathmaster is double what hers is. She does come out a little bit more expensive, probably due to that higher weapon strength, the anti-infantry, and the poison there. So that's the way these three work out for the Deathmaster in terms of where you want to know where he stands. Somewhere around the area of Fellheart and Helbron, but you'd have to be a bit more micromanaging with the Deathmaster. He has a lot of abilities, and you really want to get him charging in, taking away some armor damage, charging back out again. That is the way to use him in a battle that I've learned so far with my time fiddling around with the DLC. He has that ability to hit that actually halves some opponent's armors. You get him in, halve the armor, let some other units do some damage, get him out, get him in, stabby stabby again, get him out. That's really the way to use the Deathmaster, so a bit more micro-intensive than perhaps some of the other legendary lords who sit around the same price point and fill similar niches in different armies. So, moving on from the Deathmaster, we have the Master Assassin, the new general for the Skaven. Now, he has a few nifty little tricks. He has Vanguard Deployment, Duelist, Master Ambusher, Dodge, to name but a few. Now, when we wanted to compare him, I wanted to look for another kind of hybrid weapon infantry lord, and the Dreadlord of the Dark Elves sprung to mind. So let's put those two stats up against one another. Now, in terms of their costs, they're not too dissimilar, actually, with the Master Assassin at 1136 and the Dreadlord at 1155. In terms of their health, the Master Assassin is losing out a little bit at 3,688 compared to the Dreadlord's 4,068. But, you know, that odd sort of 400 or so off. In terms of armor, the Dreadlord takes it to the 30 of the Assassin. In terms of leadership, the Dreadlord again with the 80 against the 65 of the Assassin. Speed, the scurrying Skaven is quicker with a speed of 54 compared to the Dreadlord's 36. The melee attack is 60 compared to the Dreadlord's 60, so they're matching up with the Master Assassin there having the armor rending ability. I think that is where similar to Master Snitch. And the melee defense is exactly the same as well. In terms of weapon strength, the Dreadlord takes it, but the Master of the Assassin does have anti-infantry and armor piercing, so potentially much more damaging against the right opponents. The charge bonus goes to the Assassin, just diving into battle as he's wont to do. Ammunition, they're exactly the same. Range, they're exactly the same. Missile damage, 334 armor piercing to the Dreadlord, 417 anti-infantry poison to the Master Assassin. So, depending on the target, each one could be individually more effective than the other. The two of them match up quite significantly there. The Master Assassin, you're really trying to maybe get some wizards or something isolated and have him take them out. The Dreadlord maybe holds his own in combat. I mean, in combat itself, they're about the same, but with the extra health, maybe, and the extra armor, holds himself in combat a little bit better than the Master Assassin. So that is how those two general compares. The Master Assassin, again, could be very effective if used properly on the battlefield, I think, as a general. Moving on from the general of the Skaven, let's go to their new hero, and that is the Eshen Sorcerer. Now, this guy is pretty good. He has some very interesting new spells from the lore of stealth. But let's take a look at his stats, and when comparing sorcerers, it's never easy. You're really just looking at how you use the magic spells and what you can get the best use out of as far as valuing sorcerers. But for this one, let's just look at him compared to the other Skaven sorcerers, the Plague Priest and the Warlock Engineer, shall we? So, when we line them up, their costs aren't too far away. The Eshen Sorcerer on foot is the cheapest. The Plague Priest on foot at 1452 is next, and then the Warlock Engineer at 1555, coming in as the most expensive. In terms of their health, Eshin Sorcerer 3600, Plague Priest 3840 with the most, and the Warlock Engineer with 3,420. Has the same armor as the Plague Priest, a little bit less than the Warlock Engineer. The Engineer and the Eshin Sorcerer have the same leadership, the Plague Priest being a bit more zealotous there. Their speed is the same, Skaven on foot. Melee attack 35, higher than the Warlock Engineer, but lower than the Plague Priest. Melee defense 40, that is the highest of all of the other Skaven wizards. And weapon strength 310, that again is the highest of all of the Skaven wizards as well. And you just have to look at the fact that the other two maybe do armor piercing, which might give them a bit of an edge, make up that difference. But against some chaff, the Eshin Sorcerer should do not badly in combat. Now, in terms of their charge, 15 for the Sorcerer, finding himself right in the middle, with the Plague Priest at 20 and the Warlock Engineer at 10. The spells, I think, will be particularly useful for the Eshin Sorcerer, as he has a very large area of effect spell that doesn't do any damage, but stops troops in motion. Larger than the Net of Amantok that the Light Wizards have, and it's almost an instantaneous effect. So, them matched up, funnily enough, with maybe a Clan Scryer army with a lot of missiles, Rattling Gunners, Jezzails, could potentially decimate armies before they even get to the front line. And he also has this wonderful Vortex spell, which goes off and does a good bit of damage dealing. Doesn't move around like some of the others. It's a stationary Vortex spell that's pretty handy as well. So that is the Eshin Sorcerer. Now let's get on to some of the more regular units, and we are going to go for the Eshin Triads. This name has existed in Warhammer before, but what Creative Assembly have done with them is fairly new, giving them spears, making them a bit anti-large infantry. Very much sitting between the sort of clan rats with spears and the storm vermin in terms of their ability, but we're not going to compare them against other Skaven in this video. Let's first take a look at them compared to the Saurus Warriors, because they match up exactly in terms of cost. Both of these guys have anti-large. The Eshin Triads do have armor piercing on top of that. They do have Stalk, and they do have Weeping Blades, which is that armor reduction ability. In terms of their health, the Saurus Spears are running away with it at 10,200, compared to the Eshin Triads at 5,760. The armor, incomparable again, almost 40 difference. The Saurus taking it 60 to 20. Leadership, again, the Saurus 75 to 55. Speed, the Skaven are speedy on their feet. Melee attack 30, which is actually better than the Saurus with spears. Melee defense 28, a little bit worse than the Saurus with spears at 32. Weapon strength 30 with armor piercing and anti-large. The Saurus have 42 with anti-large. And then the charge bonus is the same for both of those units. Now, these two units should be used for drastically different things, I think. The Saurus Spears can get in there, stick it out with the best of them. They have a few more units as well, making up the difference there. And they can just stick out a good fight. The Eshin Triads, you're really looking with their Stalk ability to maneuver them around the fringes perhaps, get them in against some maybe slower, larger units before they get in there, with their Weeping Blades doing well against armor, really reducing it, supporting, getting around, flanking units, helping the units fighting them out. That's kind of how you want to use the Eshin Triads, not as a front line, hold the line kind of troop, I think. In terms of sort of other units we can maybe compare them to, let's throw them up against the Men-at-Arms from Bretonnia. Gives you a kind of similar sense of them there. A bit of a cost difference here with the Eshin Triads costing 250 more than the Men-at-Arms Polearms, but they both have that armor-piercing, anti-large aspect to them, and so let's have a look at those, how those two compare. Again, the health, the Eshin Triads, they're taking it there, but they also have far fewer units in their regiment, as it were. So 120 in the Men-at-Arms Polearms and only 72 in the Triads, so they might actually have higher health per unit. The armor is 30 for the Men-at-Arms Polearms, not too far off the 20 armor for the Eshin Triads. Leadership 56 to 55, going against the Triads there. Speed, again, will always go to the Skaven. The melee attack is better than the Men-at-Arms, who are sitting at 22 to the 30 of the Eshin. and 28 melee defense, but the men-at-arms polearms have a lot better melee defense at 40, 30 weapon strength, 5 better than the men-at-arms polearms, and they both have that armor-piercing anti-large, and their charge for the Eshin Triads is slightly better at 10 compared to the Bretonnian 6. So you get an idea of where they sit in terms of those two units there, and how we already know how to use them in Total War Warhammer 2. Moving on from the Eshin Triads, we have the Poisoned Wind Mortars. Now, for me, as I said with the Scourge Runner Chariots, these are the unit in this DLC that can have a real positive effect on the way that Skaven play. The Poisoned Wind Globes, with their magic, with their armor-piercing damage, really effective versus some of the harder units as they approach your army. When comparing these guys, it's a bit tricky, but let's go first with the War Wagon, the new unit in the last DLC, the Hunter and the Beast. Now this is a mobile mortar, and so we get an idea of sort of mobile mortars going at it, both costing exactly the same. And in terms of their health, the Poison Wind Mortars have a little bit less, with the Chariots sitting at 4,672 and the Skaven at 3,936. The armor, again, goes to the War Wagons, who have far less units in their regiment there, with 4 of them compared to the 12 of the Poisoned Wind Mortars. Speed 38 for the Poisoned Wind, and 50 for the War Wagon. Obviously, horses can be a bit quicker than the Skaven carrying a big bit of gear on his back. In terms of the melee stuff, it doesn't really matter, but they're roughly comparable, with melee attack 14 for the Poisoned Wind Mortars compared to the 18 of the War Wagon, 12 melee defense compared to the 16 of the Poisoned Wind Mortars, 18 weapon strength compared to the 26 of the War Wagon, so it does a bit better in that department. And charging, there's not even a charge basically on the Poisoned Wind Mortars, and the War Wagon has 29. Ammunition for the Poison Wind Mortars, magical, 14 ammunition compared to the War Wagon, 16. The range, 250, not quite as large of range as the War Wagon Mortars at 340. Missile damage, 65, approximately half of that of the War Wagons, but there are a lot more than 8 of the Poisoned Wind Globadiers, so that probably balances out in terms of the sheer number of missiles they're dropping on any unit's head. That's how they stack up against the War Wagon Mortar, just to give you an idea of a bit of a mobile weapons team comparison there. And I wanted to have a look at a unit that kind of matches them in terms of actual just numbers of unit in a regiment, and that was the Ashapti Great Bows. Now, the Great Bows, again, have a better armor than the Poison Wind Globadiers. They're also a bit more expensive at 1,100 compared to the 950 of the Poison Wind Mortars. A lot more health at 6,096 as well, compared to the 3,900 odd of the Poison Wind Mortars. Leadership a little bit worse than the Skaven, which is funny enough. Speed, the big statues can outrun them. Melee attack, melee defense, and weapon strength, all taken away by the Ashapti, who can hold their own a bit in combat. Charge bonus as well, as the Poison Wind Mortars virtually have none. Now, ammunition, this is where we're really looking at them in terms of what they can do damage-wise. And the ammunition goes to the Ashapti at 21 compared to the Mortars 14. Range 250 against the 255 of the Ashapti bows, so pretty similar range level there. And in terms of missile damage, 125 armor piercing for the Ashapti and only 65 armor piercing for the Poisoned Wind Mortars there. So that's how those two rack up. These guys and their Regiment of Renown unit are pretty fun to have a go on. And so I really do look forward to using these more regularly in a Total War Warhammer 2 campaign. So moving on from the Poisoned Wind Mortars, let's have a look at the Warp Grinders. Now, these guys are a funny old unit. A weapons team, good at armor piercing, good at vanguard, and can attack walls. So pretty handy to have in a siege. But be warned, they are a little bit squishy. Now, a melee weapons team with very few units in a regiment, sitting at 24 there, is a very tricky unit. I can't really think of anything else in the game off the top of my head that has that number of units in it and is kind of as cheap as the Warp Grinders, not necessarily an elite unit, only costing 600. So really, all I could do as an approach here was to maybe look at other things that cost exactly the same to the warp grinders to give you an idea of kind of their functionality and how they might stack up against some of their equal costing units in other armies. The best one probably to use is the red-crested skinks of the lizardmen. Both of them do armor piercing, so that might be a fair comparison. However, you can see there are so many more skinks than there are of the warp grinders. Now, the skinks' health for 120 of them equals out at 8,040 compared to the 3,936 of the 24 warp grinders. The armor of the warp grinders is much better at 70. Leadership is a little bit worse at 45 compared to the red skinks' 62. Speed, the skinks have it at 46. The grinders do have big weapons on their back, so they're slowed down a bit to 38. The melee attack, 26 with poison compared to the 20 with magic of the warp grinders. Melee defense, 18, very comparable to the red-crested skinks of 19. Weapon strength, 25 for the skinks. Armor piercing, 96 for the warp grinders. A huge difference there with them doing armor piercing as well. The warp grinders aren't really designed for charging, sitting at a charge bonus of 8. And the charge bonus of the red-crested skinks is 21. There you see the warp grinders. A bit of a squishy unit, can do damage with that 96 armor piercing, can be useful in a siege to attack walls, but not necessarily someone you want to rely on to go head-to-head with some of those more elite units. Now, to have a look at some other things that cost around 600 to give you an idea of what we're looking at. We're looking at maybe second-tier units. We're looking at flagellants. We're looking at battle pilgrims. That's the kind of units we are looking at here, all of which have significantly higher health, but nowhere near that weapon strength of the grinders. They don't do that magical damage, so that's really where they come into their own, and they don't nearly have as much armor as the warp grinders either. So if something with armor piercing goes up against the warp grinders, they're not going to last too long, but they can do pretty well against some other units and really bring down their armor and do some damage there. So you have to think before using these guys. They aren't quite the solid, armor-racked, elite drill team you might have imagined when the DLC was announced. So be aware of that fact before launching into the DLC, guys. And that about does it for the Skaven units. Now, I'm also going to have as a little bonus here at the end of the video, a look at the stats of the new free DLC Lord, Réponse de Lyonnaise. If you don't know who she is, by all means do check out my Missing Bretonnian Legendary Lords video, popping up in the top right-hand corner now for a bit of lore on Réponse. Réponse is a fantastic character, basically Joan of Arc in shorthand, Joan of Arc of the Warhammer world, and we put her up against some other cavalry legendary lords here to see how she stacks up. So let's put the man of the moment, Malice Darkblade, up, as well as Tyrion, who we had a look at going up against Malice Darkblade himself. Now, all of them are armored. All of them do armor piercing. Now, she has anti-infantry, which the other two don't. And in terms of her health, she's sitting a little bit lower than the other two on their mounts at 4,816 compared to Malice's 4,980 and Tyrion's just 4,900 flat. Armor, 110, same as Malice Darkblade, a little bit lower than Tyrion's with all his gear, and Réponse has all her gear in this custom battle build as well. Leadership, 75, funnily enough, a little bit lower. I thought her leadership would be a bit higher than the other two, considering she is basically a religious zealot, but there you go. She's only a little bit quicker than Malice on her people horse as opposed to the elven horses, which can be super rapid. She has a melee attack of 45, which is lower than Darkblade's and Tyrion's. She has a melee defense of 57, which is comparable to Darkblade and Tyrion's, who are both sitting at 60. Weapon strength 450, armor piercing, anti-infantry, which is sitting on par with maybe Malice at his 450 armor piercing. He doesn't have that anti-infantry as well, and a little bit lower than Tyrion's at his 470 armor piercing. Her charge bonus is the same as Darkblade's and a little bit lower than Tyrion's. So those are the stats for Réponse de Lyonnaise. In combat, she can trigger her ability, the Halo of Maidenly Wrath, which is an explosion which causes blind for 10 seconds, as well as negative 24 melee attack, negative 30 accuracy, and negative 24 melee defense. And her sword gives a huge boost to melee attack, 50% to AP damage, and 50% to weapon damage overall. Lasts about 24 seconds. So a bit of a powerhouse in terms of infantry fighting. Can't wait to get our hands on this new lord. And that's about it, ladies and gentlemen. As always, a huge thank you for watching. Let me know what you think of the stats down in the comments below, and I hope to catch you all on the next one. Alright, guys?